All right, so we'll continue with chapter 4. I'm breaking these up into more manageable time segments. Hopefully, this will make it easier for you to kind of follow along. But we'll continue on with the chapter 4 lecture. Okay, so now we're talking about sources of primary data. Right, so again, primary data that you're collecting. Well, how can you go about doing this? Um, so we'll just go through this. So single step, which is single contact, also known as cross-sectional surveys, or in parentheses has a point in time. Gather primary data from individuals or group with a single contact. So that means that at one point, you will give them your instrument, have them complete it, you collect it from them, and you go on. Now, with cross-sectional, think about how if you looked at a cross-section of a muscle tissue under a microscope, right? So you take the muscle, and somewhere along between the length of the muscle, you slice out a thin cross section, put it under the microscope, and you look at it. Now, when you look under the microscope, it's going to be a very robust image that you see. You're going to see all the structures within the muscle, the fibers, all of that. The problem with a single point in time or a single cross section is that, yes, you can say a lot of things about that particular slice that you're looking at, but you can't really say anything about any changes that may occur as you move away from that cross section towards the proximal or distal end of that muscle. Okay, so that's a limitation. The other thing that they mention on the slide are proxy measures. So if you look at the definition, outcome measure that provides evidence that a behavior has occurred. And that definition is specific to when you're trying to assess behaviors, but here's the idea. So we're using a separate measure that will tell us something about the variable of interest. So this is utilized a lot. If you look at the textbook, it gives you several examples, but one of the things that is typically measured are height and weight. We use that, we calculate a BMI, and maybe we do a follow-up study, and it's a within a subject study. So we want to see if there are changes in height and weight. Well, probably not going to be change in height, more likely a change in weight. But actually what we are getting here is we're doing the calculation, getting a BMI. And a reduction in BMI, right, we're saying that implies that that individual has done something. There's been some change, perhaps in physical activity or maybe in diet. So, I've been a part of studies that have tried to increase consumption of fruits and vegetables from baseline. One, we did enumerate or quantify the number of fruits and vegetables that are consumed, but as a backup, we use BMI as a proxy. You would expect some changes if given enough period of time through that behavior change. In other cases, some of you may be familiar with theory of planned behavior, some maybe not. We'll get to it at some point, but the theory of planned behavior basically lists some constructs, attitude toward the behavior, subjective norm, behavioral control, to the formation of an intention to make a behavior change. Then that person actually goes on and carries out the behavior change. So say you're working with a group, it's a relatively short program time, maybe 3 months, and you are trying to get them to increase their physical activity levels. That's the behavior. You may or may not see everyone adopt that behavior change within that 3-month period, right? It may be something that takes a longer time to develop. Well, you're not going to be around for that amount of time. So one thing that is typically done when utilizing theory of planned behavior is that we use intention. So if a person states that they intend to make a behavior change, we're going to carry an assumption that they will actually do that if it's a true intention. Um, you know, proxy measures are just that. We're using a separate measure to say something about an outcome or a variable of interest. Well, it has to go beyond that. We also have to have confidence that that proxy measure is in fact associated with the outcome in that way, strongly correlated, or some other association that we can establish. Now, you can assess, right, the members of the priority population, right? That's ideal. But you could also extend the survey out to other individuals. The ones listed here, significant others. These are going to be, people that have some type of intimate knowledge of the person and could answer questions that relate to the person of interest. And the responses are truthful, they're factual, they're in line with what we're interested in. Sometimes you may ask the question of a child that says, how many sodas do you drink a day? The child may give you a response that's accurate, or maybe it's way off base. You ask the child's parent, how many sodas do they drink? You may feel more comfortable with the response that they give. Opinion leaders is another group that you could assess. Opinion leaders are people within the community that seem to have their pulse on what's going on amongst all the individuals in the priority population, and can kind of give you some insight as to what's happening. Same thing with key informants. An example, I think this aligns with what's in the book, but someone that has actually, maybe it's a prior participant that you're familiar with, and someone that successfully carried out the behavior change, but worked through a number of challenges and issues and barriers to get to that point. Maybe you want to sit down with that person and say, look, I'm going to run the same program with a different group, and I want to know what were your keys to success with this behavior change. And you could use that information in some way to enhance your program. But again, we're talking about a single step or a cross-section, a slice in time. A lot of detail about that particular moment, but if there's anything that changes prior to that point or after that point, then you would have to do multiple cross-sectional surveys in order to capture those changes. Okay, so say you're going to use a single stepper or cross-sectional surveys. Okay? You can go about this in many different ways. So not an exhaustive list, but some of the common things. So written questions and surveys. In the old days, that was pencil and paper. These days, we have different software and services to assist us with this. I transitioned from pencil and paper surveys to electronic surveys through SurveyMonkey, and then have since moved on from that to Qualtrics. Face-to-face interviews. Okay, so actually sitting down with the interviewee, interacting with them, collecting data. Again, another side note. So with written questionnaires, anonymous or otherwise, it is much easier for the individual to skip over questions, just click responses so that they can get through the survey quicker. With face-to-face interviews, it's a little bit more challenging and more difficult for the person to do those types of things. You tend to get more robust data. But you can send the invitation to complete the survey electronically to 1,000 people and just sit back and wait for the responses to come in. with face-to-face, to get that information from that same 1,000 people means that you're going to have 1,000 sit-down face-to-face meetings. Again, effectiveness and efficiency. Um, effectiveness is an increase is there, but the resources you use to conduct that probably not the most efficient way. Telephone interviews, uh, similar challenges to face-to-face, except you're not having to go out and meet these individuals at various locations. You can do so from wherever your telephone is. But if any of you are like me, as soon as I see a block number or a number I don't recognize, um, I've gotten so many spam calls and things like that. I let it go to voicemail. Uh, the person leaves a voicemail, I'll call them back. If they don't, then chances are, I'm just going to assume it was a robocall. So telephone interviews, there are some challenges there. Um, if phone directories, back when there were phone books, the phone numbers listed were according to landline. Well, not many people have landlines anymore, so finding a cell phone directory may be a little bit difficult. For the longest time, I kept my cell phone number from Knoxville, Tennessee, so the area code was there. So if they had gotten a cell phone directory, I may have been included with a population that was assumed to be, in the greater Knoxville area simply because of my area code, even though I was living in, different states at the time. Electronic interviews. I'm interpreting this as kind of what a lot of us have experienced over the last few months, using things like Zoom and WebEx and GoToMeeting and things like that. That certainly adds some convenience, but again, same type of challenge. If you're doing, one-on-one interviews, that's going to consume amount of time. And then group interviews. Okay, well now we're trying to increase the efficiency, bringing individuals all together, but at that point you lose any protections of anonymity. Some people are more likely to answer sensitive personal questions under the cloak of anonymity, and when you put them in a group setting, you don't no longer have that. So each one has their challenges and benefits. You just have to decide what's optimal in your situation. Okay, the multi-step survey or Delphi technique. So this would be a situation where you don't really have a true understanding of what questions need to be asked. So what the Delphi technique does is you have your cohort of respondents. So the cohort stays the same. And one of the challenges here is that Delphi technique requires on follow-up because you're going to make some revisions to your questionnaire based off of responses to the initial questionnaire. So in order to optimize the effectiveness of this, you want to make sure that you have a subject identification that you can assign to each survey so you can track a single person's responses through all of the rounds. And then reviewing all the individuals that complete each round, right, you kind of get a sense of what questions you could ask for the second round based on responses from the first round. That's where this consensus comes in. Administered via mail or email, so electronically, simply because you're testing and retesting so often. Just again, you can do it any way you want, but at this point, you're trying to maximize your efficiency here in mail or electronic mail. Mail. Let me say something about that. I was part of a project with Dr. Penhollow. We did a large mail-out survey to the villages up near Orlando, west of Orlando. We selected postal mail because of characteristics of the population we were assessing. The villages is a active retirement community. We had older individuals, and we felt that the age range that we were dealing with, and this thing went from people in their 50s into their 90s, um, were probably more comfortable doing pencil and paper than electronic. I'm not stereotyping, just we were trying to maximize our efficiency. Um, but that was, gosh, I'll never do another mail out again, with labeling envelopes and um, tracking down addresses and that sort of thing. Maybe if you do it often, it's a little bit easier, but it just it's not something I want to repeat again. Use a postal mail. All right, so what is the Delphi technique? So you start off with your initial survey. Here's that one or two broad questions. It could be more. So maybe you start off with asking a question: are you physically active, or do you have type 2 diabetes? Okay. So then now you're identifying individuals that do. Okay. Well, I'll focus on those individuals and ask them something. Okay. Well, how often are you physically active? What types of physical activity do you engage in? When were you diagnosed with type 2 diabetes? Are you insulin dependent? Are you taking medications to manage that? And then you get your results back, you analyze it, and that leads to more detailed questions, and so on and so forth until you get to a point where your understanding of the situation, the actual needs and perceived needs is highly specified. And the number of times that you run through a round to get to that point is really dependent on how well you put it together and how quickly it answers the burning questions that you have. Okay, community forum, town hall meeting. So here, the main effort is to inform the public. So you're bringing people together so that you can share information, but you can also solicit responses from the people in attendance to, again, better understand the situation that you're in. It's a kind of a convenience. Everybody's there, so let's kind of probe them and see what issues they have. So what's the process? So you have a moderator. So someone that's seen as neutral, that's facilitating the interaction between the public and the person delivering the town hall message. Recorders are present. Again, you want to kind of document this, whether it's a digital recording, stenographer, whatever it is. Ground rules. How the meetings want to be conducted. If someone has a question, they just blurt it out, or is there a process that they need to follow in order to ask the questions? If someone comes up to the podium and asks their question, how long do they have to ask it? Just go on and on and on, ask multiple questions, that's what you want to establish those early on. Again, questions are permitted, and really that again, it's an exchange. Right? You're going to form a partnership with your priority population. Just having questions directed one way, may not kind of produce the effect of this partnership that you're after. And then this last bullet, keep in mind that the silent majority may speak out and or a vocal minority may speak too loudly. Not talking about race or ethnicity here. Basically, maybe there's a consensus group that, for whatever reason, choose not to participate. Maybe they're more introverted. Maybe they're the type of people that just kind of sit back and just kind of absorb things as they're happening. And the only data you're collecting are from those that actually speak up, ask questions, offer responses. That may not be a true reflection of how the majority of individuals in that meeting feel. So again, who you select as a moderator that may impact or influence, whether or not you have a silent majority or a majority that choose to speak up. It all relates to comfort and those types of things. Again, a community forum, not been a part of too many of those. I see a lot of challenges in that forum as far as data collection is concerned. All the other aspects of getting to know one another and having a face to a name and that sort of thing, those benefits, I don't deny those. I'm just saying from a data collection utility, probably not the first one I would jump into, especially if you talk about a controversial topic or something that's a high priority topic. You may allow for emotion to get involved in that, and sometimes emotion can kind of cloud people's judgments or maybe mask the real types of responses they would give. Other types of meetings, having a meeting just to kind of like an icebreaker, maybe a brainstorming type of meeting. Basically, you're collecting some starter bits of information to help you understand your priority population and the issues that exist. Meeting structure is flexible. Ground rules. What are Robert's rules to meetings, or something like how you conduct yourself in a meeting. Sometimes when you throw that out the window, you get a lot more participation, a lot more effort, but you could also run the risk of losing control. Costly list data type collection is minimal, depending on how you define cost. Anything that consumes time, you always have to be mindful of that, and involved in part of meetings that are going longer than expected, or maybe the full agenda of the meeting wasn't reached before time expires. So you kind of think about that. Be aware there may be socially acceptable responses in some individuals. Same thing with the community town hall meeting. People may just be parroting responses that they think people want to hear. Or you have some individuals that talk over others and try to take control of the meeting to focus on their issues. It's good to bring issues to light, but I'm sure there's probably other issues that need to be investigated and discussed as well. So, if someone is dominating a meeting, what are you going to do in that situation? Okay, a focus group. The first thing I want you to draw your attention to is this word qualitative research. So two main types, quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative is research that collects empirical evidence, data, analyzes that data, that numerical data, and applies non-parametric or parametric statistics. Qualitative data is a little bit different. So if we continue on with this, used to obtain information about feelings, opinions, beliefs, misconceptions, perceptions, attitudes, inquiring and testing of new ideas. Well, certainly these are things that we can assess with quantitative research. But qualitative research allows you to get more insight beyond the survey instrument question or item. So each of you have probably completed a spot for a student perception of teaching, either at FAU or another institution. Basically, at the end of the semester in each class, there's a rating form that you fill out. Now, the specific items that ask you, how would you rate the quality of instruction, and give you a Likert scale of 1 to 5, and stuff like that. Okay, that's going to be quantitative research. The part where you can write in like free-form responses to a question, what did you like about the class? And you're able to kind of list through some things. That is always the first thing I look at when I receive the spot results. I automatically go to the comment section. And I can read those comments, and it gives me much more of an idea of what that person experienced in the classroom as opposed to how they respond to the items on the other part of the spot. So a lot of benefit comes out, a lot of detail comes out of that, a lot of insight comes out of qualitative research. My struggle with qualitative research is how do I run that through my statistical analysis software? That's always something that I want to do. And while there are some techniques to kind of go about doing that, um, I'm just not as versed in qualitative research as some of my other colleagues. But I do value the utility of it, and I actually have some components in the future lectures that address some qualitative techniques that I really enjoy. One of them is called photo voice. And we'll talk about that at some point. But a lot of benefit to it. It's just hard for me, and this is just a personal uh, flaw, is that I'm not that comfortable working with qualitative data because I automatically want to go to some type of statistical analysis. All right, so the focus group, the process, 8 to 12 people, and that's just a roundabout number, invited to participate. And you don't want to give them a lot of details about what you're going to be talking about and asking them, because you don't want them to kind of ruminate on that and come up with, quote, prepared answers to your question. But you want to kind of get the initial reaction, the raw response to the question. Um, and while these people you invite to participate, they're not necessarily true uh, representation of your priority population. What I mean by that, um, you know, your priority population is probably stratified by particular characteristics. How many males, how many females, what's their racial profile, their ethnic differences, is there an age distribution? Well, if you collect a sample, you want that sample to be representative of the larger population. So that means that the demographic profile of the larger population has to be mimicked in the sample. What they're saying here with focus group, you don't necessarily need to do that, but you want to make sure that the major groups of your priority population are represented in the focus group. Right? So if in your total population you have many more males than females, but you're not necessarily assigning people to the focus group based on gender and how that distribution is, but you recognize that, okay, I probably want more male viewpoints presented in the focus group than female because that's probably what's happening in the larger population. People should not know each other. Sometimes that's difficult to pull together, but um, one of the things with the focus group, you want someone to give an honest answer, and you want to avoid a situation where a person doesn't give the most honest answer because that person's worried about how that person that they know sitting across from them is going to react to that response. So you just want to avoid situations like that. Led by a skilled moderator, must be well organized. That basically just keep everybody on track. Anytime you bring that many people into a room and you're encouraging them to participate and to speak up, it's very, very easy to get sidetracked and go off in a different direction and not really address the purpose of the focus group. Okay, the moderator takes the group through an unstructured interview using a series of predetermined questions, like I just mentioned, staying on track and with time constraints. The observer or observers takes notes or tape, so either your video recording the focus group or you have someone writing down responses. Remember, the responses is why you pull these people together, so you want to make sure that um, they are put together, and plus some other qualitative aspects. Um, if you video the session, right, you may be able to focus on body language or facial expressions as the person, as the people hear the question or they're responding to the question, and that may alert you to some sensitivity or something that may be going on that you want to investigate further. And then finally, findings should be interpreted as suggestive and directional, not definitive. Okay. Again, there's no statistical analyses that you can rely on and say, okay, this is statistically significant difference. It's not representative of the true population, so generalizability is impacted a bit. But really, you're just trying to get just a sense of what's going on, and you want to build from that. Okay, the nominal group process. So here we're having it's a highly structured process as opposed to what's going on in a focus group. So here you're bringing together a few knowledgeable representatives of the priority population. So if you look at your target population and say that we're talking about type 2 diabetes, that's the topic that we're discussing in this group forum. Well, there may be certain individuals in your group that have type 2 diabetes, are very knowledgeable about it, and you want to bring them, include them in the group, right? Because the information you're going to get from them is maybe a different level than what you would get from someone newly diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic. Again, what's the purpose that you're bringing these people together for? Are you meeting that purpose? So the process, a smaller group, 5 to 7, again, that can fluctuate, but I think they just want to show relative to a focus group, it's smaller. Here, each person writes an answer to a single question. So by writing it out, you want to kind of pull detail. You want a detailed response from the individual, something that they may not give just in a free speaking kind of form. It gives them some time to kind of think about their answer. Then each person shares their answers with no discussion. Right? You don't let people comment. Just let's get through all of these responses. After everyone's finished, then we allow for follow-up. Maybe someone says, "Oh, you mentioned X, Y, Z in your response. What did you mean by that? I was following along till I got to that point. I got disconnected. Can you follow up with that?" Then the group selects and ranks the importance of the stated number of items. So maybe there's a collection of people, reoccurring thing that was with type 2 diabetes. One of the challenges that several of the people discussed was identifying hidden carbohydrates in foods, things that aren't necessarily listed, or common knowledge about a particular product. They think it's it sounds like it's sugar free, but there's other forms of carbs in it, or whatever it is. That keeps coming up again and again. So you want to take that and somehow incorporate that into your program plan. It may include a preliminary or final vote. Right? So preliminary would be if there's further discussion to occur. Or final vote is just that. Are these the items that we collectively recognize as being the most salient or the most important? Let's vote on it. Okay, observation. Remember, we're talking about collecting data, primary data. So observation is basically where you are doing that. You're observing a group of individuals for the presence or absence of certain variables of interest. Okay. Notice of taking indicator. We go out further. It says minimal contact method. So here, you want to be an observer. You don't want to be a participant, and you just need to be careful of how you kind of inject yourself into the situation where you're not a distraction or you don't draw undue attention, right? Because that may alter what you're able to observe naturally in the population. It can be direct, actually seeing a situation or behavior, so you're physically observing these things happen, or indirect. So, maybe you're trying to see if there are, I don't know, some relationships that exist within a group of people. Um, Without you're observing, so you're not asking a question. So you're, how do you know if two people are in a relationship? Right? What are some cues that you look for? Maybe it's hand holding, right? Maybe it's embracing, um, whatever it is. Like if you see that, then you're going to make this indirect connection. Okay, well those two must be in a relationship. Can be obtrusive, right? That's where the people that you're observing, they're aware that you're observing them, or unobtrusive, they're not aware. Again, just think about, there's a thing called bias. Could you be biasing how the people are interacting with one another because they know that someone's there is watching? Unobtrusive, you minimize that, but then um, you also got to, there's an ethical concern with regard to privacy and surveillance and that sort of thing. So you want to make sure your IRB protocol is approved. Specific methods of observation, windshield tours. Windshield tour, basically you're riding around in a vehicle, you're looking through the windshield and observing what's going on. Anytime I've ever bought a house or moved into a house, or prior to moving into a house, um, I always drive through the neighborhoods, different time of day, different days of the week, just to kind of get a sense for, well, what's going on at other times in the neighborhood. So windshield tours is something that's done. Walkthroughs, so you're physically walking through an area and you're just making observations of what's going on. Photo voice. I mentioned this earlier, something that we will be talking about, and no, this isn't the point in time that we're talking about it, but we'll go into it in more detail. But um, just for now, so photo voice is a technique where you give a group of participants a question, right? So maybe the question is, um, what prevents you um, from eating healthy in your workplace? And you tell them to answer that question through photographs. So they go through their workplace, anything that they think is a barrier to eating healthy, they would take a picture of it. Then you would follow up with that group and you would go through the photographs with each question. And you would have the individual explain how that photograph captures the barrier. And really, it's a technique kind of to get people out of their shells, because a person can usually describe a photograph that they've taken, why they've taken it, rather than simply answering the question, what are the barriers that keep you from being healthy in the workplace? It helps them articulate their thoughts better. And I've been on a couple projects that utilize photo voice, and the qualitative data that you collect is very insightful. It really describes the relationship of the question to the situation that the participants are going through. A big fan of photo voice, but like I said, we'll discuss it in more detail as we go forward. Okay, so windshield tour or the walkthrough, just some examples of things that you could observe, like housing types and conditions. You drive through a neighborhood, right? Well, what type of housing? What type of zoning is it? Is it business? Is it mixed residential? What's going on? A lot of townhouses, single-family homes, subsidized housing, recreational commercial facilities. Right? It's one thing to look on a map and see, okay, well, this community, there are 7 recreational parks. Okay, check, they're doing better than the community that only has 5. Well, um, you need to actually go to these recreational areas and observe them. Is it an area where there's evidence of crime? Um, is there drug paraphernalia on the ground? Is there beer cans? Is the grass high? That's going to give you more information about the recreational area than simply looking at it on a map. Private and public sector services, what utilities are available in certain communities as opposed to others, social and civic activities. Again, as you're driving through, you just make note of these things. Identify neighborhoods or residential clusters. Again, because of geography, or certain communities kind of brought together because they're got I-95 on one side, Atlantic Boulevard on the other, and they kind of pinned in. So they may be defined by zip code, community. However, geographically, um, the community is actually much smaller because people don't typically venture out and cross those major thoroughfares. Maintenance of buildings, grounds, and yards, kind of mentioned that with the recreational facilities. So, again, things that you wouldn't necessarily get from a written description, actually physically going out and observing these things can be very insightful. Okay, photo voice. Uh, participatory data collection. Like the participants are a big part of how effective and useful this technique can be. I kind of explained it. They use photographs to capture a moment, and then the real benefit is when they sit down and they explain that photograph. That is really the utility of photo voice. It allows people to be articulate. Um, when without the photograph, they would struggle to kind of collect their thoughts and kind of convey those thoughts. Um, so the main goals of photo voice: enable people to record and reflect on their community's strengths and concerns. Okay, check, we got that. Promote critical dialogue and enhance knowledge about issues through group discussion. So, imagine projecting these images onto the screen, having the person kind of talk through why it is, right? It may be enlightening for everybody in the room to kind of see that perspective, right? We always talk about perspective and how people can see the same situation differently, right? This could help kind of see things through other people's eyes, and that may be very important to what you're trying to do. Inform policymakers. Again, it's really something. It's a different type of information people are used to consuming. So maybe it's the novelty of it, maybe it's the storytelling that's involved with it, but it tends to grab your attention. And if you're doing this in a room full of policymakers, it may help them see the issue more clearly so that they can make the appropriate policy decisions. All right, so maybe you're thinking, okay, well, photo voice, that sounds like something I'd like to incorporate into my planning project. Well, um, you got to make sure you do it correctly in order to get the full benefit. Define the goals and objective of the project. In the project here, we're talking about the photo voice project. So, you explain this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to see, what the barriers are that's preventing you from making this behavior change because I want to help you overcome those barriers. So you want to kind of spell that out. Identifying the community participants. Okay, so these are going to come from your priority population because you're interested in their perspective. Providing participants with the purpose and philosophy behind photo voice. So you're going to explain the technique and what they'll be doing as far as going out, what type of pictures that they're taking, and there's an expectation that they're going to have to explain those pictures. Providing participants with training to carry out the project, maybe on how to frame the picture or what they should be taking pictures of. Providing a theme for taking pictures, right? So giving them those questions to go out and then answer through their photographs. Letting the participants take the picture. Um, it's the same thing. So if we look out the window into my backyard, and there's 5 different people looking out that window, each of the 5 may focus on a different element in my backyard. Right? That's perspective. So by letting them take the pictures, we want to make sure that we're getting things from their perspective. And then finally, selecting photographs to reflect the concerns of the project. The first time I was a part of the photo voice project, gosh, this was a while ago, because we gave the participants disposable cameras, film photograph, not cell phone, which, these days I would just say take pictures with cell phone. But I remember back then we had the disposable cameras, And we had one lady that she took pictures of scenes that addressed that particular photo voice project, but then she had so had photographs available on the film roll, and we're kind of going through the photographs, we had to get them developed, and we're going through them, and all these pictures of her cats. And it had nothing to do with the photo voice. She was just taking pictures of the cats around her house. So you wouldn't want to throw all of those into the mix and kind of go through them, so we had to take some of those out. But that's kind of an extreme example, but at the same point, you just want to. Some photographs are better than others, or the kind of explanation behind the photograph, maybe with more detail that was given by one person or the other. So maybe you want to include that perspective more. So again, it's all dependent on what you're trying to do and maximizing your effectiveness and efficiency. When you're in the groups, okay, have a dialogue. Sometimes this can help tease out more details from people that as they're describing the photographs. Maybe you start to see people that light switch clicking, and they start to see their concerns being echoed in the photographs of others. Again, you want to have discussion. We're a team as part of this process. Okay. 9, contextualizing the photographs by writing captions. Again, depending on how many photographs you have, how many different prompts that you had to go out and take these photographs, maybe something that's helpful. Okay, so here's where qualitative could possibly move into quantitative analysis. Number 10, codifying the results by identifying the issues, themes, or theories that emerge. So maybe there's a common barrier or common type of barrier that keeps coming up. Well, we would codify that. We would say, okay, well, that's a barrier number 1. And then we have some other photographs. Oh, wait a minute, this is a similar barrier. We'll label that falls under barrier number 1. And then, so by doing it that way, by codifying these themes, now you can at least have counts or frequencies, right? And we can use the non-parametric statistics to analyze those. Number 11, identifying the stakeholders and venues to present the results. Okay, you should be doing that as part of anything, but who are you going to share these results with, and how are you going to conduct your presentation? That we were talking about venue. Making the presentation to the community stakeholders. Okay, so you're sharing with them information that will help them make decisions later on, or kind of see the scope of the project or scope of the issue. And then finally, taking action based on the results of the photo voice process. So we did this for some utility. Now we need to utilize those results.